just to say a few words about myself. I've been a stutterer my entire life. I began before I remember, but when I was in university, I pretty much overcame it. I won't go into that story. It's a kind of a strange story, but I've been virtually fluent in most situations since then. I did go into our U.S. Peace Corps in Turkey for 2 years when I was 21, and I learned Turkish pretty well. Wow. Nothing like as well as you speak English, but I was pretty good. But my stuttering returned in Turkish, as bad as it ever had been. But when I came back, I became mostly fluent. Now I still stutter from time to time. Now, Florence Myers, and I, of course, have collaborated a good bit, and she has pointed out that I probably also clutter a little bit. I have never had a very easy time coming directly to the point unless I really concentrate on it. I would say my rate is not terribly fast, but maybe at the fast end of normal. Yet I have lots of ums and fillers and so on, far more than I believe than most people who have done as much speaking as I have. So I have some personal experience in cluttering, but then of course most of my experience has been in the area of research. I would say that this is probably the area that I've made the most or the largest contribution in. My research and my advocacy has really been on trying to define what cluttering is and what it is not, with the purpose of attempting to bring it to, let's say, a science of cluttering rather than just another larger series of anecdotes about it. So I worked with Florence Myers, but also Klaus Bacher and Larry Raphael. I originally came up with a working definition, and they worked with me, and we've adopted it, and we've changed it over the years. But the last one that I refined was with Katrin Schulte from Germany. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've seen that chapter, but in it, it basically refines what we did before, or we knew before, or advocated before. And that is that the primary problem in cluttering is one of rate. It can be either too fast, or too irregular, or both. Now, each of those is hard to define specifically, but it's a perceptual judgment of, does it sound too fast? Does it sound too irregular, or both? It also then, that is kind of the baseline, and then one or more of the following symptoms can occur with it. One of them would be too many so-called normal disfluencies. The second one would be too many deletions of syllables, especially in multi-syllabic words. And the third one would be kind of a general term for problems in prosody. In other words, the pauses, the syllable stress, the speech rhythm don't match what the native or the language should be. Pauses are often too long or too short or in the wrong places. Syllable stress can be off, but it just doesn't sound like what the normal listener would expect in terms of just the general sound of the language. Now, that would be our most recent lowest common denominator definition. Now, what it does not include are all kinds of things that other people do include in their definitions, such as language problems, pragmatic issues, a whole host of things, such as, just one second, I've got a list of some things here that often are listed. Lack of awareness. They have oftentimes some learning issues. They have some writing problems. They have handwriting problems, all kinds of things. The reason why I call it a lowest common denominator definition is because I think at least you have to have those elements. The other elements are optional, and many of them occur quite often. But the reason I stick with that is that I have seen cases, and I've actually worked with a few, where it is pretty much, if you can, under pure cluttering. In other words, that's all you have. You don't have any of the other kinds of things. So for someone, in my view, to say that you must have language problems to be a clutterer, how do you explain a person who clutters that does not have such language problems? So that's why I go back to that basic lowest common denominator definition. I think clinicians don't really worry about that. Researchers do, because if you're going to build a body of knowledge, you need to know who you're studying. And the problem with most of the previous research in cluttering for several generations, probably actually well into the 1800s, was that the population's different that they studied. I'm sure they had some common elements there, but anyway, that's why I did that. Most people, this was intuitive, but for the most part, I believe that most people most people who stutter have an idea most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, exactly what they want to say. And they know that they have the physical ability to say it, okay? Mm-hmm. And the disorder, the problem for them is getting stuck on just, for some reason, being unable to complete that movement. With cluttering, on the other hand, it appears that many of them, most of them, if you will, just simply start talking. And then they just encounter problems. Often they're unaware of them until somebody brings it up over and over again. And they often just can't put their finger on what the problem really is. It's just like, that's how I talk. And if I have lots of repetitions, you have repetitions, you have why are mine any different? Well, it's because they are excessive and people can't understand. So from the speaker's perspective, I think that's the biggest difference. From the listener's perspective, on the other hand, I believe that we would suspect cluttering, especially if we're a little bit trained in it, if we see that this person is hard to understand, but we just, I think, unconsciously rule out, well, if they are maybe just crazy, we kind of would say, well, they just aren't thinking clearly. Or if they, we think they have some other neurological problems or articulation problems that's there all the time, we might excuse it that way. but we just kind of rule those out. And then if we end up with they're just talking too fast or too jerky, and we can't understand them very well until they repeat it, slow down, and they often do after we tell them to, although they usually get annoyed. I think that's when the listener begins to tune in. This is something different. This is, it's not stuttering because I don't hear them struggling. I just hear them repeating or talking or collapsing words and so on. Now, with stuttering, on the other hand, I think the listener immediately picks up on struggle. And because usually a word is either imminent, it's pretty clear that they're trying to say something, or maybe they started it, or they're trying to say it and going like this. I mean, it's clear that that is the point of the, or the location of the problem. Thus, listeners typically recognize that this is stuttering, and most people do know what stuttering is. It's probably the disorder that is most well known by the public of all of the speech and language disorders. Certainly not everyone has seen stuttering, but even young children can begin to identify it with just one or two examples, and we've done some research to show that. When you see these lists of here's stuttering, here's cluttering, what you typically end up with are a group of, or lists of symptoms that are more characteristic of one or the other, and you've seen them. They're everywhere. You know, the stutterer is highly aware of the problem. The clutterer is unaware. The stutterer has lots of accessory behaviors or secondary reactions. The clutterer tends not to have those, and so on. And then those can be useful, but I don't think they get at the real essence of the problem. And what happens sometimes with these lists is that they become people expect to see them, and what we know about both cluttering and stuttering, the symptoms can vary tremendously. I said, okay, what are the sufficient and necessary symptoms? And then if we start with that, then we can add the others as optional if they belong there. Well, what it has done, at least, it has laid the groundwork to say, you know, we have to agree on something. Well, there are several answers to that. If the kind of cynical but absolutely correct one is that nobody knows. The more responsible empirical answer would be we don't know. However, evidence is pretty clearly piling up on the side of genetic influences, of physiological differences, and these, of course, manifest in all kinds of ways and some people, and I'm not familiar with that literature, unfortunately, now, but there's some good research coming out of Hungary right now that are showing you know, co-articulatory studies and so on, that looking at speech motor dynamics and showing problems with cluttering. Even in the UK, there have been some studies. One that I was really sorry didn't get published. I even actually reviewed it, but showed some where they had done PET scans and so on of the brains of clutterers versus controls, and they showed some differences. There were a few problems with the study, and it got rejected, which was just, I couldn't understand why. But there have been far less research on cluttering per se, on the cause, than on stuttering. But I think even from before we began to develop a good science of cluttering in this country, if you go back to Des Olis's time or even before, I mean, most people would have concluded that there were more likely to be a physical problem with cluttering than even when everybody pretty much thought that stuttering was a psychological problem. I have no quarrel with that at all. It isn't exactly consistent with what I said the lowest common denominator is, but we've always said that's a working definition. It's an empirically based definition, and when the data suggests it should be changed, then it should be changed. I am not personally convinced that we know enough about all of the ways that cluttering can manifest that we can be sure that we could divide the individuals into those camps, or the people that have 3 camps. I think as that research progresses, we may well come up with some very good categorizations that will be not only, well, important things, they have to be valid, okay? Once they're valid, we know they're valid, but then can they be reliably applied? If one person would diagnose somebody as phonological, and the next person would diagnose the person as syntactic, and have good reasons for doing both, then we need to refine that a little bit. And it's a way of categorizing, and we hope that the categories are going to be useful, but you first have to identify the categories, and then you begin to test them in diagnosis and treatment and cause and whatever else. And if they hold up, then you have a category that's useful.